Welcome back to another video in the JavaScript tutorial series. In this video, we're going to take a deeper dive into functions. And as you can see from the demo app, we're going to be generating a random number of dots, randomly placing them on the page, and giving them a random color. This will involve the use of several functions and passing data from one function to another. And of course, this will also include DOM manipulation via JavaScript. So if you're ready to get started, let's jump over the VS Code. Taking a quick look at the files for this web page, we see we obviously have an HTML file. It includes a link to a style sheet. It includes a link to a JavaScript file, and it has one HTML div with an ID of container. The style sheet's pretty short. Just add some styles to the body, and it creates a class called dot, which we'll use to create the dots on the page. The JavaScript file, as you can see, has many functions, each of which takes at least one parameter. We have a function display dots, which takes an array of points, an array of colors, and then the maximum number of dots to generate. We have a get dots function, which takes the maximum number of dots to generate. A get colors function, which takes the same maximum dots, a get max dots function, which takes a max, and a process function, which takes max dots. Now, for the sake of starting to walk through the code, I've commented out the code in the window on load function that generates the random number of dots. As you can see, when I reload the page, we only have one dot, and it's not changing. This is so it'll be easier for us to walk through the code and look at what's happening in the browser. So functioning kicks off when the window on load function is executed, and we call the process function passing 1 to it. If we look at the comments above the process function, we see that this is the main processing function of the application. It takes one parameter, its name is max dots, and it represents the random number indicating how many dots will be displayed on the page. So normally, in the code that's commented down here in window on load, we would dynamically generate that random number and set a timer to rotate the dots as they're displayed on the page. But again, in this case, we're just going to pass 1 to the process function to start walking through the code. In the process function, I've declared a couple variables that are going to be arrays. One to hold the points and one to hold the colors. I've also console.logged the max number of dots that we're passing into the function, and we can see that here, max dots 1. I'm also going to console.log the points array, which in this case is 1 because we've only generated one random set of points. Its values are 90 and 846. So the 90 is the top position for the dot. The 846 is the left. So this basically says start at the top of the viewable area on the page, come down 90, and that's the upper left-hand corner of the dot. And then the 846 is start at the left, go over 846, and this is where the left edge of the dot will be displayed. The colors array, again, only has one element in it, and it's a RGB randomly generated to represent this color. The 1 we're generating by adding 1 to the current index in the array where the dimensions for the dot are located. So obviously we only have one element in the points array. It's at element 0, so we add 1 to it. That becomes our first dot. Back in the code, I'm going to set the value of points array equal to the result of calling get dots and passing max dots to it. So if we scroll up and look at the comments for the get dots function, we'll see that this is the function that populates the points array with the top left positions for the dot. And it generates these for the number of dots passed in to the max dots parameter. So this function takes one parameter, its name is max dots, and it's the max number of array elements. The function also returns a value. The variable it's going to return is dots array, and this is going to be an array containing the max dots number of the top left positions in an array. So the get dots function, as we said, takes one parameter named max dots. Looking into the get dots function, we see we have a variable to hold the array of positions for each dot. And in our case, again, we're just dealing with one right now. We set constants for the top, max, and left max positions on the page. And then we're going to loop as long as the index is less than the value of max dots, which we've passed in, and randomly generate a top and left position for the specific dot. Then we're going to push into the dots array an array that has two values, top and left. So this is a two-dimensional array. Dots is going to be an array of arrays, and the arrays that are in the dots array will have two values. The 0th position in the array that we're pushing to the dots array will be the value for the top coordinate for this dot, and the value in the first position in the array, or the first index, will be the left position coordinate for the dot. So after we're done looping, we'll return the populated dots array. So if we go back down to process where we called get dots, we've put the return of the dots array into the points array. And now points array is an array that hold the coordinates on the page for each dot. And then I'm console.logging the points array. And that's where we saw this points array with the two values in the 0th index. Next, we're calling the getColors function passing max dots. And if we expand the comments for getColors, we see this is a function that generates random colors. It takes one parameter, max dots, which we know is the maximum number of array elements, and returns a variable named colors array containing the array of colors. So if we expand the function, we see we have a variable for the colors array. The max is 255 for the RGB values. We loop through the number of max dots that we need to generate colors for, randomly generate the RGB values, put those into a string, and then push that string into the colors array, and then return the array of colors. So after getColors executes and returns, colors array is an array of randomly generated RGB values, which we write to the console. And in our case, we have one value. Then finally, we call the displayDots function, passing to it the points array, the colors array, and the max dots, which was passed in as a parameter to the process function. So if we look at the comments for displayDots, we see that this function actually displays the dots on the page. It takes parameters, the first being the points array, which is the array of the coordinates for the dot's position, the colors array, which has the randomly generated RGB color values, and of course max dots. If we expand the function, we go to the HTML and execute document, so go to the DOM, the document object model, get the element where the ID is container. So if we go back to the HTML, we now have a variable that points to this div. Then we set the inner HTML property of the container equal to an empty string. Now, the first time through the loop, we don't really need to worry about clearing the inner HTML property because there's nothing in between the open and close div tags. However, once we execute this loop once, there will be HTML in that inner HTML property. It will represent the dots that we're putting on the page. So the next time through the loop, remember, eventually we want to re-enable the code that will randomly continue generating these dots. So each time through, we need to clear that inner HTML. Next inside the function, we'll loop through the max dots array, which is passed in as a parameter. So each time through the loop, we'll go to the points array and get the element at the ith index. And of course, the first time through, that's element 0. We'll store that element in a variable named element, and then we'll create variables for the top and left coordinates for the dot. And since the elements in the points array are arrays, which include the top value and the left value, when we access the top in the element, it's at position 0. So again, go into points array, get the current element. The current element is an array with the 0th index representing the top coordinate and the first index, index 1, representing the left coordinate. That's what element is. Element 0 grabs the value for the top coordinate. Element 1 grabs the value for the left coordinate. And actually, let's just console.log the element to see what that looks like. Save this, go back to the browser, and here's the element with a top position of 210 and a left position of 320. Next, we'll get the color for the dot from the ith index in the colors array. And now we're going to perform some DOM manipulation and create new divs in the HTML. So here we'll create a variable named dot, and we'll go to the DOM, the document object model, and create a new element of type div. And if we go back into the web page and inspect this element, we'll see that it is actually a div, but it has the background color of the RGB value that we dynamically created and put into the colors array that we passed into the display dots function. So that RGB value is coming from the colors array, and that's what is being used to set the color of the new div element that we put on the page. We position the div by setting the top style equal to the top value that we got from element 0 in the elements array, and the left from the left value. Then we want to display the number of the dot on the page. So if we go back to the page again, obviously we only have one dot, so it's dot number 1. And we do that by creating a text node on the document and setting its text equal to I, which is the current index in the loop, and in our case is 0, plus 1 to give us the actual number, not the index for the dot. So then we take the text node, which has the number that we want to display in the div, and we append that as a child element to the dot, and ultimately append the dot as a child to the container. And remember, the container was the HTML element on the page that we got by referencing the ID of container. And we would do this for every dot that we need to create based on the value of max dots that we passed in. So if we collapse this and then scroll down to our window on load function and make this a 10 instead of a 1, and then reload the page, now we've gone through that loop 10 times to randomly create these divs and append them to the DOM. So that leaves us with one more change to make. So let's delete the process where we pass the hard-coded value in and uncomment this code and take a look. So here we're creating a constant max of 100. We're setting a timer interval to 3000, and then we're calling the process function with the result of calling the getMaxDots function passing the max. So the getMaxDots function is going to randomly generate a number between 1 and 100 and then return that value. And that value will replace the call to the getMaxDots function. So if we call getMaxDots, we passed it 100, maybe it returned 50. Well, whatever that value was, let's just say 50, it will then pass that to the process function. So 50 gets passed in to the process function. It will then create the points array for those 50 dots, and then the colors array, and then it will pass those two arrays and the match dots to the display dots function, which will go through the loop and then dynamically create those divs and append them to the DOM. And remember, each time it does that, it gets the container element and then clears the inner HTML. And the reason we need to do that is, let's go back now and refresh this page now that we made the code change. So this is the first set of dots, second set of dots, third set of dots, and so on. So every time it generates those dots and it's going to put them on a page, it needs to clear the inner HTML of the container. Now, the next thing we need to look at is what is driving those dots to be recreated and displayed on the page over and over and over every 3 seconds. Well, that happens down here when we call set interval. So this will create a timer for us based on the execution of this function named myTimer at the timer interval that we created in the constant. So every 3 seconds, we're going to execute the myTimer function, which will call getMaxDots, passing in the max, the 100. It will generate the number of dots we want to display, return that value, and then pass it to the process. And it does this over and over and over. And that is how this page is put together. So this example's pulled together quite a few things that we've learned so far in this tutorial series. I hope you enjoyed walking through this, and I hope you're excited to meet me in the next video.